I'll just begin with a little bit of the basics. So yes, LexisNexis, specifically LexisNexis Risk Solutions is the part of the business that I work for. We serve the insurance industry, and we've had a bit of talk already about the insurance industry's role, perhaps questionable role, in some of the issues we're talking about today. And hopefully it'll serve as a nice jump off for what I'm going to talk about, which is essentially about, the title I received was Data for Flood Resilience, and data, as Stephen hints, is very much at the core of the products that we provide to the insurance industry, because essentially what the insurance industry wants to know is they want to know the difference between good risks and bad risks in order that they can act accordingly, whether in terms of pricing good risks differently to bad risks, or indeed just rejecting certain kinds of cover outright as may need to happen. And again, we talked a little bit about that. So the first slide that I was going to show is actually a nice visual one, nice visual and impactful one to do with flooding, which I'll return to once we get there. But really, the intention was to establish the fact that flooding is a real problem. Nobody likes to be. In fact, the title of my first two slides is "Floods Are Bad." They're not pleasant for the people who have to experience them. And if we focus on, I suppose, on my job of work, which is to give the insurance industry what they need, the insurance industry doesn't like paying out claims on them either. So they've got to we need to give them the best possible heads up of which risk locations may be subject to flood. Now, again, I have some figures, some numbers, not very many numbers, so it's going to be very easy for me to read them out. Really, this is just all about establishing why it is that flood is something that the insurance industry needs to take very, very seriously. So in Great Britain, the number of addresses with some potential for flood is 2.5 million properties, or about 8.8% of all buildings. So if we take that on top of the fact that the impact of a flood event on a building is extremely severe and costly, that is a statistic you've got to be very, very concerned about. And incidentally, the breakdown of that is about 10% commercial, 90% domestic. Now, the insurance industry cares enough about that at the point of underwriting, you really want to know and not just flood, our products will provide information on a number of different peril types with the aid of data sets from many different sources. We help also to assess accumulations of exposure. All of these things that a good insurer needs to know in terms of understanding that they're going to be solvent enough to deal with any claims that may arise. Now, in addition to the financial impact of what can happen, there's also a social impact. There's a negative social impact for flooding, which is essentially that given the fact that it can be costly or impossible to procure flood cover on the open market, if you're in a location which is known to be exposed to flood, it leaves you in a very troublesome position, certainly as a householder. You've paid a lot of money for your house. Where are you supposed to go? How's that supposed to work? Now again, Flood RE has already been mentioned earlier today. I won't go over the details again. It's a current initiative to address that problem, but of course, again, let's focus on the fact that it's supposed to be a temporary measure in order to fix a problem. So ultimately, we need to return, the insurance landscape needs to return to a place where people who need flood cover can get it, where the insurers can know that their claims will stay within the realms of what can be supported by the overall pool of premium being collected. And as a data provider, I guess, we need to provide the most detailed, most even-handed data set that will enable all of that to happen. So in terms of the evolution, I just want to talk about, I suppose, the methods that are open to the insurance industry in order to essentially to discriminate, which is a troublesome word to use, but being strictly accurate about the English language, indeed, to handle differently one risk versus another according to this particular issue of flood that we're talking about today. Now, the simplest and most obvious way of doing that, I guess, is simply to go out and survey the site. Because when you do that, you can be extremely thorough. You can identify some of the local hazards that you find there. If there's a river going by the end of the garden, and you can see that the house isn't raised very highly above that, then yeah, you can maybe tell a few things. And you can also pick up on signs of past damage. So if there have been previous events, and even if it's not part of your historical claims, you still are maybe in a position to determine that there's something up with this particular location. But there are a bunch of things you can't do that way. You can't identify all of possible hazards. It won't, you won't pick up on all possible subsidence risks. You won't pick up on many possible sources of water. And what you absolutely can't do, and I mean, let's talk about the 90% of these properties that we're saying are domestic. What you definitely can't do is you can't go out and visit every single location that you're being asked to cover. So straight away, the best you can do with this is spot checks. This is not going to fix the problem. So we come on to the second approach. Now, the second approach been with us for quite a long time and is still reasonably widely used, even if these days what's feeding into this approach is often facilitated by some of the more advanced methods that I'm going to come to. And that's basically the idea of having a reasonably crude blacklist based on regions or postal codes, where you know that there's a history of flooding, or where for some reason brilliant, thank you. Or where for some reason you've got some other reason to realise that there may be flooding. This was my opener. This is a little restaurant or pub in the southern German city of Passau. Now, if anybody's aware of where Passau is, it's down on the Austrian border, and it floods a lot. The name of the actual pub is Bayerisch Venedig, meaning Bavarian Venice, and that's the reflection of the amount of water that's around there. And if I look at the next slide, this is, if you swivel a little bit to the left from where this photograph was taken, that's the River Danube. Not only is it the River Danube, but it's about 200 meters upstream from where it is joined by the River Inn and the River Ilz. So basically, one of the things that causes Passau's problems, apart from the fact that it's down in a valley, is that it's got these three rivers feeding into it. If there's a major flood event in Germany, it pretty much always hits Passau. And if you haven't seen it already, just right about to the right of that sign is a mark on the wall which says Wasserstand am 12. August 2002, water level at that particular date. That's high. That's a lot of water. And I suppose I put that in there as a reminder. Everyone in this room will know this anyway, but when the flood event happens, it's devastating, it's costly. That's why this is important. So I'll flick through to where we got to. So this was the surveying of the site. So we got up to the notion of taking a course, and I say course in that at this level I'm not yet going to call this particularly geospatial, and you can apply this method without geospatial analysis in that you'll typically look at a portion of the address. So you may look at a portion of the postcode, or you may even look, and as some of you may have guessed from the accent, I'm from Ireland. We've only just got postcodes in the last 5 weeks or so. So prior to that, the ability, in the absence of geocoding, which I'm coming to, which is how things are done nowadays, in the absence of that, what used to happen is my parents have a postal address. The postal town is a village called Dunboyne. A river runs through it. It floods a lot. At one point, they were at some exhibition which had an insurance broker stand exhibiting, saying, "Oh, I bet we can reduce your cover." The minute they heard the address, no way will we give you any cover, you're on the blacklist. They live 5 kilometres out of the village, but in the absence of better ways of doing it, and when you're working on a paper process, as the insurance, certainly the broker industry, used to do exclusively, that was the best that could be done. So essentially with this blacklist approach, again, it's still a lot better than going out and eyeballing everywhere by hand, and crucially, it allows the insurance industry to not unwittingly take on a whole bunch of risk locations that are all going to flood in one event and with horrible consequences. So the advantages, again, if it effectively limits your exposure, because at the very least you can be very conservative. You can use a blacklist like this to be extremely conservative and to restrict your taking on of risks that might be troublesome. Likewise, manual processes I've mentioned, it can be applied by those, and it's easily understood, even by the public. When it comes to saying to the public, no, I'm not going to give you cover, they'll be annoyed, they'll realise that they're not in an exposed area, but at least they'll understand where you're getting your information from. The problem, you cannot maximise your safe business. You will turn down, as an insurance industry, you will turn down unfairly a whole bunch of people whose business you would have actually loved to have. You would have written the business, they would have got cover, it wouldn't have flooded, everyone is happy. So you're leaving money on the table if you take a crude approach like this. Because of that, it also fails to provide differentiation against your competitors. So as an insurer, the best business that you can possibly write is the business that you realise is okay, but all of your competitors are scared to take on, because you will make good margin on that. So again, the cruder the measures are that the industry is operating on, the less differentiation there can be between the various people in the industry. And likewise, depending on where you're, if you're not feeding this kind of an exclusion list, if you're not feeding that based on actual predictive science, but if you're using it, if you're building it only on the back of where your previous claims are, certain areas you're not going to see, so new build areas and so on, there can be a problem there. So we come on to the next best approach, and this actually is where I suppose LexisNexis Risk Solutions, or MapFlow in Dublin as it used to be before we were bought by LexisNexis, we got into the insurance software business by applying essentially this approach that I've described here, which is it is the simplest geospatial approach that you could possibly take, in that you don't attempt to tie your assumptions of where the peril locations are to anything systematic or hierarchical like a postcode or a town or a village, but rather what you do is you apply it geospatially based on something else, and in this case the something else is a terrain model. Simply, if you know how high the land is at various places, if you know where the water courses are, you can then play some what-if games and say, what if the water rises by 1 metre, 2 metres, 10 metres, 50 metres, as it must have been in Passau. And you calculate geospatially, you calculate the extents of the potentially inundated areas when you do that, and the map down in the corner shows, in fact it's showing visualizations of two extents, the blue one being a water extent calculated in that way. The red one is a crime area inferred on other, in this case on the basis of claims. So doing this already delivers value. It's still quite a conservative view, because you're not really making any assumptions as to how likely it is that you get that level of inundation in any given event, but at least it tells you the difference between potentially wet places and potentially dry places. Advantages, a whole bunch of those people, my parents for instance, who are seen to be well away from the water and elevated a bit, they'll get cover in a way that they wouldn't have got with the previous way of doing things. So it's an improvement, but it's still not as scientific as we get at the moment. But I will take an aside here to talk about geocoding, because even the approach we've seen there only works if the picture you have of where an address is located is accurate, if you can actually point to it on a map. So geocode, in the case if we look at the areas covered by blue here, you need to know that the address point that you're contemplating is actually in that blue area or out of it if you're to make a decision. So geocoding essentially is the process of taking that address, cross-referencing it with an address dictionary and getting coordinates, and then you take those coordinates, do a spatial calculation, and you say, does this lie within an area of anything that I'm scared of, basically, anything that I should know about. You can provide it basically with a score based on every peril on every other data set that is of relevance to the underwriting decision that you're about to make. So, as to then where all of this got us, in essence, the overall approach of geocoding the address on the one hand, and then cross-referencing it with data sets, that remains. What has happened is the data sets have become far more sophisticated. So rather than just assuming that the water rises uniformly out of a water course and only a water course, and not considering soil types, not considering drainage. What's happened is we've got complex computer models operated mostly, we do in LexisNexis, we have our own analytics department, but actually for something like flood-related data, there are specialist companies. The visualization we have here, the blue bit, which is actually just nearby here on the far side of the M1, that comes from a data set by JBA, but there are a number of providers of data sets, both in terms of fluvial, surface water, dam breach, coastal erosion. There are all kinds of data sets that you can consume as an insurer and use them essentially to score any given address, and based on those scores to make your underwriting decisions. So again, it's better than, better data essentially means you're doing a better job of sorting out the good risks that you're happy to take on, and the more troublesome risks that you'd rather, well, depending on your appetite for peril, you either want to raise the premium or you just want to decline them completely. Now, at this point, it's sort of worth taking a brief aside, because earlier on when we were talking about this issue, the problem that we were sort of faced with was the fact that there are real people living in houses, there are real companies operating businesses that are going to fall within these blue areas, that are going to be seen as bad business. And what needs to happen to those? Well, there is a kind of, you can look at it in a number of different ways. I remember at least one Irish politician has denounced, from using parliamentary privilege, this phenomenon of geocoding, because that was the word he knew for it. But essentially what he meant was geocoding and then using it to find out whether a location is a good or a bad risk from an insurance point of view. Now, you can look at it that way. You can look at it and say all of these methods cause people to be declined insurance cover. Though in fact, as we saw a few moments ago, my parents were turned down for insurance cover precisely because there wasn't this level of detail available. So if anything, the more we push forward with the science, actually the fewer people are being declined. The problem is, of course, some people will continue to be declined, and that they will be declined in ever more forceful ways. Now, I've mostly, before we had the slides, talked about our tool, the tools that we provide. So I'll skip over this, but this is the kind of dashboard that underwriters could use if they actually wanted to take a map view of the risks that they're contemplating. So I'll jump straight to the issue of what do we do about all those people who, with the best science, we still, the insurance industry still probably doesn't much like the look of. Now, first answer is a reasonably glib one, but I'll give it anyway, which is build smarter. And I know that that's not always the problem, right? Some houses are already standing, and some buildings are in locations that were fine once but no longer are. Nonetheless, people do persist in building buildings in really stupid places. So the first thing to do is to not do that, or at least to understand what it is that's going to that's going to mean that it's all right. You've got to mitigate against that risk. And in theory, Flood Re, which is the next one I'm coming to, in theory, they've sort of set down the principles in which that should happen, and let's see. But of course, the very existence of Flood Re also helps, because at least for a while, it means that a bunch of these people who wouldn't have been able to have flood cover will be able to have it. It buys everybody some time to work out what else we need to do, because Flood Re, again, is designed to be with us only for as long as is necessary to bring about change. Third option then, okay, tough luck is an option. We need to consider that. Sometimes you just plain can't do anything. If a property is going to flood, it's going to flood, and if it cannot be protected, then from an insurance point of view, they can't really be expected to pay out, or to offer cover. If they've offered cover, they'll pay out, but if they haven't, if they know that there's a relative certainty that they're going to have to pay out large amounts of money, there's no way they're going to take it on, and that's just commerce. And the only way we'll get around that is if governments, as in some countries is the case, if a government is prepared to remain the insurer of last resort. It's an option. property or community level protection. Now, again, we've talked a little bit about this, and this is kind of relevant. Now, as Stephen mentioned at the start, we're involved with BRE, and again, as with many of the initiatives we've heard about today, with the kind support of Innovate UK, we're involved in a project essentially to devise a data set that can be operated in tandem with the ones we've already looked at, but which will heed things that are not usually heeded by the data sets that we have. Because the data sets that we have, they're not actually collected based on ground truth necessarily. They're very much the opposite of the first approach I described, which is where you visit every building and survey it. And so if we acknowledge that of those people who are deemed unattractive business on the basis of those data sets, what we probably need is data sets that can complement the ones we've already got and that will complete the story. And we'll say, okay, we know that all of the hydrological models and all of the large-scale science says that water could flow here, but here are all the things we've done to counter that water flow, to prevent it from getting into the property, or if it gets in, to prevent your claims from being particularly high. Now, we're working on that. Certainly what you can do against it is have those measures, but it's important to point out that just having them won't necessarily help you. The insurance industry needs to know that you have them, needs to know it in a way that is as systematic as they can know what return period you're in and how deep the floodwater might get. So this is a part of the project that we're working on. And for now, I mean, it represents just, I suppose, a continuation of the policy that we've been engaged on, which is to always increase the granularity, always have finer grained knowledge of whether damage will occur to a particular building or not. And that is pretty much all I've got. So I suppose I'll put the word questions on, but I know that'll be happening. Actually, will be happening now, won't it?